My name is Steve Hearson. I know a number of you, and one or two I do not know so well. Lovely to have you with us today. I'm joined by Adrian Clark and Hannah Bonham, and they will tell you a wee bit more about themselves in due course. In terms of just getting ourselves started, just to signpost you, in a moment we're going to do a brief Menti just to get your brains ticking over. So if you could take a screenshot of that or make a note of the code. I'm sure many of you used Menti many times before, but I will shortly be throwing up a Menti question just to till the soil of the territory we're exploring today. Okay, I will also put that into the chat in a moment as well. Okay, in terms of working together, a wee bit of contracting. So where possible, have your video on, other apps and notifications off, mute if you can. Very light contracting, as is the way with the kinds of things I run. I encourage us to be as upfront, honest as we can be and respectful of difference. And where you find yourself disagreeing, either energetically or not, be curious and seek to understand. In terms of the technology, I'm trusting now there's no such thing as a Zoom virgin in 2023. So if anybody is stuck with the technology, please do just either shout out or say something in chat, but we will be making use just of Zoom and Mentimeter a couple of points during the session, and that will be it. So there we go. So by way briefly of introductions, I am an independent consultant, supervisor, coach, and generally rather feral in the world these days. I've not worked for an organisation for a number of years now. I spend most of my time working with direct clients, but also I work with a number of others as an associate. So I do roam fairly far and wide in terms of sectors. I'm not going to say much more about myself because that will become clear as I frame the session. Hannah, Adrian, would you briefly introduce yourselves before we come on to the meat of the session? Hannah, would you like to go first?
Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. My name's Hannah Bonham. I'm a postgraduate researcher in leadership at the University of Sheffield, and my professional background includes about 15 years of delivering complex transformational change and organisation development in the public and voluntary sectors.
Hi, I'm Adrian Clark. So I'm Head of Organisation Development at Virgin Media O2. I've been involved with a few different organisations in terms of setting up centres of expertise and change and OD practices. And prior to that, I've been a management consultant as well in the field of change management.
Lovely. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is just share with you the Menti question, and this is the question. How would you know an organisation has successfully built its change capability? What would you see, hear or feel? How would you know? Because that's what we're talking about today, this notion of building change capability. Lovely, lovely stuff coming in. Thank you. That's possibly partly the audience here today and us as a group. And I'm struck by how many of these are relational, they're psychological, they're human in terms of the things that you imagine that you would see, hear or feel in the future. So that says something possibly about our maps of the world. Okay, so I'm going to just allow that to run in the background. We may come back to that. I'll scan down so you can see a few at the bottom. Lovely. Okay, so let's crack on. So what we're going to do, a little bit of context on the book for those who may not know about it, then some framing from me of today's inquiry. Then I'm going to get Adrian and Hannah to share some of their experiences, born of my prodding of them in the last couple of months, before I get you into some small groups for some inquiry and sense making, and then we'll have a final Q&A and plenary. That's the menu. Beg your pardon, I still need that up. So the book, about 4 years ago is when I started thinking about this. Some of you will have heard this story. For those who haven't, I will very briefly tell it. I spent a few years at Roffey Park, and I think about 7 years ago, we had the corporate rebels from Holland over for a session. And during one of the sessions, one of the founders of the corporate rebels said, we started our journey 2 years ago with the expectation that we'd find the magic bullet, the silver bullet, and then make a lot of money. We've come to the conclusion there isn't one. Well, so far so entirely obvious, but what was interesting was the response in the room, which was this sense from a group of experienced OD and change people, coaches, consultants, but there is an answer really, isn't there? There is a silver bullet. And several times questions or comments came from the group from a place of, but there must be an answer. And from that point on, I started an inquiry into why is it that leaders and organizations, and actually by extension, many of us who work on the other side as helpers, seem to believe that there are silver bullets, there are guaranteed solutions to complex problems. So it's the myth of fixability. If you do a search on Google for no silver bullet, you see it as a construct, as a term through many news stories and in many sectors. So over that time, what I've done, I had a brief break for about 1.5 years due to family responsibilities. But what I've developed is a hypothesis that there's a functional collusion that exists between leaders and organizations and all the many different groups, tribes and guilds of people who have an interest in selling solutions for complex problems, whether that be business schools, theorists, gurus, consultancies, the purveyors of methodologies, and actually the fields of practice as well. The fields of practice such as org development or org design or HR, who sometimes orientate towards differentiating themselves from each other first and foremost, rather than asking the question, what is it the client may really need? So I'm going to stop there. If you're interested, extracts of the book are available for people to review. And at the moment, the plan is for it to be released back end of this year, as I'm about 70–80% of the way through. Part of my thinking on this, when it came to change capability and where this session came from, is when I think about what I've experienced in organizations over the past 10 years. I've done loads of OD practice development and org design skills and consulting skills development. I've talked with lots of clients about how they might develop change capability. I've observed what they do. And I've been struck by how they seem to be really intent on coming up with some kind of plan. There's always a plan to come up with a solution to constructing or designing or forming typically a group of people or configuration of resources that will answer this question of how do we build change capability in order to ... And yesterday, as I was pulling this together, I did a wee search for the term building change capability. And I was struck in some senses by how similar lots of these graphs and images were to poor old Wile E. Coyote's. On paper, Wile E. Coyote's plans are entirely logical. They make sense within the frame of reference he has when he's trying to catch the Roadrunner. On paper, the purported certainty of all the models when it comes to building change capability make total sense. They are wonderfully seductive. They're particularly seductive when presented to senior leadership teams who want their anxiety assuaged by somebody who can offer them something that will fix it. So what then happened over time is I noticed that I work with a number of major organizations in the last 10 or so years, and three in particular stick in mind, which is where I actually met Adrian in a couple of these instances. So Adrian will, of course, throw things at the screen if I say anything he profoundly disagrees with at this moment. But my observation was this. So an organization exists and it will consist of a number of different parts. And at some point, they decide to spend an extortionately large amount of money on developing the capability of a number of people to facilitate change, to manage change, to do change, to deliver change. They may be framed or construed as all development people, as all design people, as all development and design people, as change consultants, but the common thread here is they are all orientated towards helping the organization with change, and they are framed as being a change capability. What then seemed to happen was this: typically a group would be formed that could consist of either a dozen people, or in some cases, well over 100 people. So with one organization, I spent 2 years running, I think, about 10 programs, taking well over 100 people through a consulting skills program. And this entity, this group, will report into one or more of the other parts of the organization, maybe HR, maybe change and transformation, maybe to somebody else in the C-suite. And then something will happen. Something changes. Anxiety kicks in. And that links to potentially the shame and the ego and the narcissism that might be at play with an organization as well. And the need to do something, anything, results in the very people who've just been developed and had a fortune spent on them leaving. They may get made redundant, they may walk, they could get redeployed elsewhere in the organization and may just be lost somewhere. And I saw this happen repeatedly. So quite literally, I think it's in 2 instances in particular, large amount of money spent literally shortly after finishing these programs, a change comes, and the very people who have been developed to the point where they are best placed to facilitate the change that is present, which often is about rearranging an organization, potentially losing people or doing something strategic, they suddenly find themselves not being held as, oh my goodness, we can help with this. These are the people we need to keep. They are treated simply as another part of the organization to be rearranged. And there's an absurdity to this. It really struck me, having gone through this process multiple times, it is the definition of absurdity. How is it organizations spend a fortune on what they are calling change capability, that when the moment something quite challenging comes along, they get rid of people or they make it very difficult for them to stay within the system, either they become so disillusioned or stressed out by the work that they choose to walk. How is that? So there is inherently a tension. So one of the things that changed in my own mind as I mulled on this was there is a need potentially for people in an organization to understand what good looks like. Hence the need sometimes to build centers of excellence, program offices and such like. At one point, I did hold a view that actually centers of excellence were actually pointless, and I've kind of moderated that in time because I think there is an interesting question about what does good look like. At the other extreme, there's a need for dispersed local change agents, people who can move between or move from one place to another, and they may emerge in one place and then vanish, and then other people may take their role. And that is far more here and now. That's the work proper of change. And if I think to what you all put up in terms of what you would see if an organization has built its change capability, much of what you wrote speaks to me as being more here and now work rather than something that is more about a center of excellence. So the kind of questions that fed into my thinking with Adrian and Hannah, and this is where I want to start with them, is, well, what does change? Well, sorry, what does good look like? What does it mean to be the center of change, particularly as an internal? One of my observations of internal change agents is the better they get at their role, they're often one of the nodes through which crazy flows. And yet, as one very senior leader in an organization I interviewed, when I was asking him about what it is these people who were going through the development needed to do, he said they need to operate at several grades above their pay level. So think about the implications of that for a moment. What works and what doesn't work in this context, and how do you build this in a sustainable and sustaining way and acknowledge that actually it might need to evolve rather than be fixed in some kind of organizational design that then doesn't respond to changing context? And do we even have a clear understanding of capability? What I construe as capability, having done loads of work with change practitioners, may be very different to a senior leader driven potentially by anxiety or driven by share price. Their definition of anxiety, I suspect often, actually I know, because I've had conversations around this, is substantially different. I don't think we actually have a clear enough idea about capability. So I'm going to pause there, and I'm just going to start off by asking either Hannah or Adrian. I've given them each 5 minutes to riff, and I will then time them out, and then we will have a brief conversation before we move into some inquiry. So Hannah or Adrian, do you want to kick off? Who wants to go first?
I'll let Adrian go first.
I first think it kind of makes me want to watch some Wile E. Coyote cartoons, to be honest. Remember how good they were. I don't know if your scenario, whether the Roadrunners like acting as like organizational culture, just that it's always just that little bit far away to actually pin down and kind of get a kind of grasp on. I guess picking up on a couple of your kind of themes you introduced there, Steve, I think part of when you had that question around how does a business know whether it's developed it or not, but part of my kind of slightly flippant answer is when it stops blinking when asking whether we have it or not. But actually there's something in that. Sometimes I think there's this sense that there is a binary view of capability, that almost we either have it or we don't, as opposed to something that we're continually building, adapting, working with. And actually the more that labels apply to these things, while it can feel kind of cathartic in some sense, actually some of those labels can become unhelpful if we put them on pedestals, or we put them in areas where we think there's certain qualification or expertise required in order to actually just work with some of the complexity that we're working with. To put that perhaps kind of a slightly different way, I think when it becomes a sense of it's a bit binary, or actually that sense of having that reality around it, is almost, if you've got somewhere in your structure that you can point to and go, there it is, look, we've got it, it's there. Or you've got a methodology again that you can point to, well, there it is, we've got a methodology, so there we've got it, right? We've got the thing. Well, if you want to call that kind of a silver bullet, a silver bullet, or a sense of how we can demonstrate it, actually there is, it's almost an easy thing. It's not a cheap thing, but sometimes an easy thing. Well, can I point to it? Yeah, can I point to it on a structure chart? Can I point to it on a methodology and go, well, there we go, right? We've got something. We've got it. But that doesn't necessarily make it real. It's a bit like saying, well, look, I've got a pair of trainers and a healthy recipe book. That doesn't mean I'm now healthy and fit. That's just I've got the stuff kind of for it. Now, the flip side of that, just to kind of give a balanced view, is, but there are sometimes I think that can be helpful still. So what I mean by that is sometimes it can still be helpful. Well, actually, there is a home where actually we've got somewhere where we can go for guidance, advice, support, to get some expertise, if kind of held fairly lightly, but also there's somewhere we can go actually where we can use a common language around it. And that's an analogy I use. Is it's a bit like if you go into a DIY store, right? And what is it you're going to go in and ask for? How do you know what you need and where you're going to get it from? And sometimes you do, right? You just know, I need to go and get this tool, or I need to go and get a replenishment of this stuff. I know what I need. I kind of just need a bit of going, where do I go to find it? And actually, what's the language I should use to ask for the thing I'm looking for? That's going to make it easier to get, easier to find, and easier to use. And there's other times I might want to go into that store. Like, I don't really know what I want, but I kind of know I've got a job that needs to get done. And actually, what I'm looking for is a bit of guidance around, or how am I going to get that job done? And actually, if someone can help me to say, you're going to need these tools, you're going to need these things. This is going to help you to kind of do that job. Actually, you need a bit of guidance. Look, there's some good information. There's good kind of coaching support we can put in place to help you with that. That to me is almost a bit of an equivalent. And then kind of the last bit is actually somebody you go in there, and you don't really need someone to sell you some tools. You don't really need someone to guide you. You need someone to actually come and help you with the job at hand. There's no point me walking to the DIY store and say, can you show me where the wiring section is? Because I've got some good wiring to do back at home. Someone should call me out on that and say, what you need is an electrician. So there's times, I think, in that where actually you do need to go and find the people who've got some of that capability, can help to guide you. Now, it might help you in future to be able to do that or more of that yourself. But actually, these are the times I think it is helpful to have, you know, a go-to place, a go-to person where you can kind of ask these kind of questions, get that kind of guidance, get that kind of support. And possibly the last thing I'll say now, so that you don't time me out or I don't just keep going, is that then for me can help with, as a business, what is it then we're actually trying to put in place? Because part of what I described there are things where you're developing stuff, right? Developing tools, guidance, good skills, and you need to do some of that. And then there's another side of that, which is then how you deliver it, and actually how you deliver that in practice, how it becomes an applied capability. And that to me then gives you some choices as a business around how do we, which areas are we focusing on? What do we really want to try and build here? To what end, to what purpose? Because that could be quite a different model between whether we're seeing this as something we're trying to develop stuff or something which is in a real applied practice we want to be able to deliver in practice. And then for me, as someone who's looking to build some of these capabilities, that can also help guide me around, and what type of practitioners and practice do you therefore want? And then let's look at how we can make sure you've got that, and we can line that up, try and get that in the right place, so that when you have your presenting need, we've got areas where you know to go to, lines of support, things that we can have ready in order to satisfy not just your presenting need, but the thing you're actually looking for and needing that sits below that.
Brilliant. Thanks, Adrian. That was just over 5 minutes, but I'll forgive you that. It's good. Hannah, over to you.
Thank you. So as I said earlier, my experience is largely in change leadership. So that includes leadership of 2 different transformational change services. And that word transformational is an important one for me to touch on before I move forward. I like to think of change as a continuum, with transformation at one end and continuous improvement at the other. In my experience, transformation is where organisations often want these change experts, whereas continuous improvement is often better led by the subject matter expertise in the business area that is improving itself. I'm not saying that's always how it should be, but it's useful to know the context that's influenced my thinking. A lot of my reflections today, therefore, they're going to come from the perspective of leading teams of change experts, either created from scratch or developed from a point of handover to me. And those include people with diverse skill sets, such as project and program managers, business architects and analysts, human-centered designers, communications engagement professionals, and lean practitioners, amongst others. So we're thinking about capability. For me, capability is 3 things. It is capacity, expertise, and culture. And these principles, they can be applied in any context, but in change in particular, there's an added element, which is the need to render ourselves obsolete when we've successfully delivered something. So that means that often the individuals within a change function will spend less time with each other than they do with their clients, the members of the business for whom they are delivering the change and with whom they're delivering the change that they are currently assigned to. And I think that's really important to bear in mind, particularly when I talk about culture in just a moment. So first of all, capacity. It's so often the focus of conversations when organisations are under pressure to solve problems, isn't it? It's the reason that's cited when we can't hit a deadline, when we can't reach a level of quality or keep within budget on a project. Sickness, holidays, turnover, those sorts of things come up time and time again. And capacity is important. Knowing that you've got the right number of people at the right level of influence and autonomy to meet the challenges is crucial. But without expertise and the right cultural context, it won't solve the problem or make the most of opportunities. In terms of expertise, while I was preparing my remarks for this webinar, I found myself reflecting on how much I enjoy the diversity of challenges that one often faces when delivering change. And I believe that it's in learning from these diverse experiences that I've improved my repertoire, if you will, as have my colleagues around me. And by repertoire, I mean a whole host of different things, from methodologies to processes, exercises, behaviours, and specific persuasive examples. The list obviously goes on. But expertise aren't just gained by attending training courses or other types of formal development. They're also earned day in and day out when we try things and learn from those that go well and those that we could have done differently or better, provided we take the time to reflect, and provided the development of our expertise are embedded and distributed throughout that change function, whether that be a team, a service, a project, so that they're available in perpetuity. And that takes me to the cultural element of developing capability. There are so many things that contribute to a thriving change culture. And please don't think that because I've chosen to talk about this that I believe, therefore, I've nailed every aspect. It's a job that is never done. But how you might achieve this within your own organisation will depend on a whole host of different factors, including the type of change you deliver and the pressures that you're under. Some of my suggestions from my experience, though, firstly, would be to encourage a diversity of thought, experience and opportunity by recruiting the widest possible pool of people and skills. Recruit them on permanent contracts to maximise their psychological safety and to retain their growing expertise. Create an environment that fosters curiosity, not assigns blame, and encourages constructive challenge. Ensures that there is ample space for reflection and creativity. Regular imaginative retrospectives and communities of practice are tools I believe are as critical to a successful change team as setting a budget. Invite, receive and respond to feedback. Not everyone will do this, that's absolutely true. But the more people who do, the more natural it becomes. I know it is scary sometimes, but when you change your behaviour in response to feedback, that builds trust, which strengthens your community. So I think that the rewards of feedback are well worth stepping out of your comfort zone. And finally, in my experience, if you're a change leader, you need to share and distribute that leadership. The culture you foster must not be dependent on any one individual. You have to ensure that a proportion of every member of your team's time is set aside to spend on service development, to contribute to that change community. So this might be logistically, behaviourally, or otherwise, but it creates a sense of ownership, and it helps you to grow the next generation of leaders and ensure that you're hearing all of the voices in your team and not just those who are paid the most. There's a lot more I'd like to say, but I will leave it there for now. Thank you.
Lovely. So that was kind of our starter. So I'm going to ask you both now a question, which is, in a sense, what you've both done is articulate some of the ideal, your hopes. So how come, and Adrian I know better than Hannah, obviously, so Adrian, I've worked directly with you as a client before. How come the dissonance and disconnect between what you believe to be what is needed and what it is, in our case, you and I have on occasions experienced and observed?
Right out the gate with the easy questions there, Steve. Okay, no single answer, right? Otherwise I'll be giving you a silver bullet back in response. But I would say part of that is a level of expectation in a couple of areas. So the first one would be like, if you took some of first thing is who the customer is for this, right? Who's the customer of this change capability? Because actually it's almost in their eyes, what is it that they're expecting? And then is there then a dissonance between what their visualization of change capability is and what it is that you're offering or you're building? And they don't have to be, diametrically opposed, but actually, where do those meet? So if you're to take someone who's a customer of our change capability, close your eyes, and I'm going to say a few word association games. If you can start using language of capability, like what would be the images or words that they may be associated with? Now, in my experience, some of those would be very toolkit based, very skill set based. So be able to describe, okay, yeah, I can imagine, I can visualize that this looks like a toolkit that you're going to train people on, that they're going to get good at, they're going to use, and therefore a miracle then occurs and we're suddenly incredibly mature and capable at doing change. I also think, well, yeah, you could do things and you would improve your maturity and your capability overall to a sense. But actually to really create the conditions for change to be effective and successful, to me, is as much around then the mindset and the value set. So if I've got one difference of expectation to begin with, would be that's the difference between the sense of the capability being delivered as a set of tools and specialist skills, and actually being delivered as a value set and a mindset. And to give an example of that, when I'm looking at, and I don't want to give too much of a sense that there's a single way of this, but when I'm thinking about what are the types of practitioners I want doing the change, if the things I'm describing are more their value sets and mindsets around, can you work with humility? Can you be pragmatic in your approach and use of available tools, plural, not singular? Can you keep positive when in the light of complexity? For me, those are more like mindset things around the kind of the types of practitioners of this type of approach. But you try and describe those in business terms, they don't sound like things you can easily put tangible metrics around. So that's something that's
okay.
It's a case of meeting somewhere, I think, in the middle of those things.
So just to kind of connect something there. So I did a few years ago the ProSci qualification. A client of mine paid for me to do it, and when they signed me up for it, said to me, "Steve, I know you're going to hate it," and they grinned as they sent me off to do it. And I spent 3 days locked in a room with a very, very good ProSci consultant who was actually very good. And in the 300 odd slides that they presented, there was nothing about conversations. And I said to this guy and the group, all of this stands or falls on dialogue. And he said, yeah, you're right, 70% of it does. But the word dialogue was utterly absent from the methodology. So I'm kind of left chewing on the rhetoric of change capability, and ProSci sits within a particular school of thought about how you build change capability. It's a methodology. And how the clients, the internal clients you both work with, to what extent are they really up for what it is you are describing is needed?
I think it's a really interesting way of framing the question, Steve. For me, my experience is that the commissioners, if you like, the clients or the organisations that have asked me to deliver change in the past, they're always up for it in the moment that it's commissioned. And part of the challenge is that the environment that we're working in, particularly in the public sector now, is so very fluid and so very pressured that I often find a commission comes in and it's about a particular type of quality or a particular challenge that needs to be overcome or changed. And you're absolutely right. The dialogue and the conversation at that point is crucial, and you tend to have very senior people talking about commissioning that piece of work, and it's really clear that it's a priority and everyone in the room is focused and there's a lot of energy and excitement about the change that's coming. But then over a period of time, we're all aware of that triangle, aren't we, of the time and the cost and the quality. Over time, the kind of emphasis between those shifts. And in my experience in the public sector, almost invariably, it shifts to focus more than anything else on the quality that we want to achieve for the customer. But that doesn't happen in a really obvious way. It's not like we talk about that really openly, but it's about, well, this isn't good enough and that needs to change, and we're not happy that you haven't done it this way. So it's because that people are subconsciously trying to think about the best possible outcome they can get for the clients or the customers of their organisation that they shift that emphasis. But that's when the other elements start to move on. At the same time, you'll find that the leaders that kick the piece of work off have now got some other big fish to fry, not necessarily bigger, but just big, and it's taking that urgency away from what you're trying to do. So their focus shifts, and you end up with a slightly changed stakeholder leadership group that then wants slightly different things. So I don't think, again, no silver bullet, there's also no single problem that you ever come to face, is there? But my experience is it's that shift over time between the stakeholders and the nature of the dialogue and the instructions they give you that creates that kind of confusion.
Which takes me to something else, and I kind of be interested in your not less your intellectual, but your gut response to this both. Okay, so one of my colleagues, Helen Charles Edwards, is a trained transactional analysis practitioner, and in TA they talk about the 3 Ps. Some of you may be familiar with this, which is permission, protection, and power. And the first two are fairly self-evident. They're inherently what they say on the tin. The power one is more to do with, Helen describes it as, you have a bag of smelly fish. You need to take out the smelly fish and talk about them to build the psychological safety. And there's no way to attend to that stuff unless you start talking about the smelly fish. Now, the reason I'm mentioning this is I'm struck by something that I've observed in a couple of organisations where there is a clear invitation for people to develop a practice and to become more skilled at doing the very things you're describing, and to become skilled at what a number of people in this group put into the first Mentimeter, the dialogue stuff, the communication stuff, the conversation stuff. And yet, I question whether or not there is genuine permission. I question whether or not there is genuine protection. And if you look at what, for example, Jeffrey Pfeffer has written about leadership development programs, one of the things he says is that it is utterly pointless putting people through a brilliant leadership development program unless you attend to the context in which people re-emerge. So it's no good getting them better at being able to speak truth to senior leaders if you've actually not got the protection and permission in place culturally when they return. So I guess my nerdling question here is, so what's your take on whether there is genuinely permission and protection for people who have had their change capabilities developed? Because my observations is that is actually far less common than I would hope it is. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. So my gut reaction is that, seem like a gut reaction when I'm hesitating over how to express it, does it? It's that I have experienced some really fantastic environments over the years where I have been invited to take part in development opportunities and then genuinely let off the leash, it feels like, to explore and be creative, to kind of actually carry out the new skills and to test and to embed that experience with others in the services that I've worked in. I've had some really, really positive experiences over the years. I've also had some less positive experiences. It feels about 50-50 to me, and it really, for me, depends on the leader that you have, the direct manager above you, because my take is that at the very top levels, they would never want you to be taking time to invest in development if you weren't then going to actually enact that development that you've received. But then in the middle layer, sometimes the day-to-day gets in the way and it feels like, okay, well, we don't have time to learn that, we need to focus on the thing that we do right now. So I think it's usually about the person that you've got directly above you, who you report into. And as a kind of a change leader myself, I do my absolute best to create the environment in which people can carry out those skills. So that's probably where I come down on it.
Adrian, thank you, Hannah.
Yeah, I'll give you it. So mine would be almost, where are we trying to make impact, and almost where's this constraint coming from? And if I just talk very briefly around, are we trying to operate almost at organisation level, team level, or individual level? Because I think there's differences then as to where certain either constraints can exist or where genuine impact can be made. I think sometimes when we talk about building things like change capability, we're kind of coming from an organisation perspective, and actually sometimes I think the greater impact comes more about team level, and sometimes the individual level as well. But for me, I find there to be less of a constraint once you're operating more at a kind of team level. I think some of the constraints can be when you're trying to operate at kind of quite a broad, almost enterprise organizational level, and then just because you're going to come up against the normal kind of organizational boundaries and perspectives that may occur, and then it can be almost easy to find kind of constraints, and likelihood is, yeah, you're going to get the ability to really make a difference and make impact and have a complete openness is going to be constrained, I'd say, within some degree. So maybe one take on that just came to my mind was, like, where are we trying to operate with impact, and at what level then is the greater chance of being able to operate with those levels of less constraint, even if not completely unconstrained, because that might be an area where we need to think about, right, where are we trying to focus.
Lovely. What just popped into my mind, Adrian, is you said to me about one of your former contexts, and I vividly remember working with you there, how your CEO at the time banned anybody from using the word culture. and it always left me wondering how on earth it would be to do the kind of role that you had there when you were not allowed to talk about culture. You know, it's
the importance of language comes into play as to, because in a situation like that, you just find different ways of describing it, but just you use a different way of work. We're going to talk about ways of working instead, but actually becomes it becomes both a hindrance but also an enabler if you can find a common language to then talk about what is it we're really trying to then impact. Lovely.
So in a moment we're going to move on and we'll get people chatting. I just want to one final, it's a quasi observation question. I've been noticing, talking to people in the organisational development community recently, a pattern starting to arise or show up, which has led me to wonder whether or not we're entering kind of the age of transactional OD. Because what I'm observing, including also some of my supervisory clients, is that people are being valued in OD, which is construed often as one of the most arguably radical, challenging change practices. They are being valued based on their ability to deliver projects, to project manage, to organise, to be, transactionally very good. And it leaves me wondering whether or not, and one of the other reasons why organisations mess up when it comes to change capability, is here you have a field of practice that its roots are in challenge, are in working with difference, are in working across communities and working with and in conflict, that it is basically, if not being lobotomized, then certainly being neutered. And in order to manage the anxiety of organizations, it is far easier to turn OD into a transactional and safe change practice than it is to genuinely embrace what it is these people you may have developed to be as OD practitioners, to allow them to roam free and to do what it is they could do.
That's a big one to throw in there. I would say the other thing that's part of it is the increasing sense of pace at which things need to be done and immediacy. And that's not just in change as a field of practice. I mean, we see that in politics and political systems, certainly in the UK. You see that in society with social media and its impact in terms of that sense of everything needing an immediate answer, but then actually being really polarizing, which actually drives more of a sense of difference rather than a sense of community and coming together. So I would see if there is a move towards, or a sense that there's more of a desire or an expectation of transactional OD, I think for me that would link to just almost a general theme that we're seeing and a general pattern around the desire for certainty, stability, immediacy, because there is more and more ambiguity and uncertainty and volatility of VUCA stuff which we're actually dealing with, and it's not on a PowerPoint slide now. It's here and now in organizational terms, but also in social terms, in health terms, in political terms.
Lovely. Hannah,
I'm going to be a little bit provocative because I know you love that, Steve. And I actually not sure I agree. And it could be my background in the public sector and the way that things are developing there. But my recent experience is that I'm being encouraged more and more to be positively disruptive. Right. Definitely feeling a sense of, yes, there are all these tools and tools are great, but what we really want to hear from you is challenge. You know what we're trying to get to, you know how far you want the needle to move. We're going to trust you as professionals to take us on that journey, and we're going to trust the process. I've been saying that a lot over the last few weeks because I hear it a lot from senior leaders where I am currently. We will trust you as experts to take us through the process and to challenge us to be the best we can be. So I don't know whether that's public sector versus other experiences, but I'm feeling positive about the direction it's going.
Lovely. I don't want everybody to agree. That's brilliant. Get some different voices. So what I'm struck by is that conversation, how it connects to what we had in the first round of Mentimeter. And I've got one more question before we move into the next conversation. This kind of partly prime pumps our inquiry. But out of curiosity, group, what do you consider to be the top 3 most important change capabilities that people need to develop? And once we've done this, we'll go into some conversations. what's incredibly interesting about this is that nothing so far is coming up about knowledge or tools or methodologies or points to the need to know those.
In on that, Steve, because I feel like I'm definitely getting a resonance with that, because I feel like we should be moving more towards recruiting people on the basis of behaviours, not their skills and experience. I can teach somebody to be a project manager. I can't teach them humility. And I think that's where this is coming in for me.
Lovely. Good. So keep those coming in the background, because I'll share the Mentimeter decks with you after the event. And I'm going to put you into some small groups of 3 or 4 now for 20 minutes. Adrian and Hannah, do you want to join a group as well?
That'd be great.
Yeah. So I will get you, that should be about right. Yeah, you should be either 3 or 4 in a group. And as I say, 20 minutes. I will loiter in the main room just in case there's any problems. Okay. And I will see you all soon, unless there's any questions. No. Okay, 20 minutes. Okay. Rooms are opening now.
Hello.
Hello, Simon. Hello, Sarah.
We chose to say goodbye to each other properly rather than be wrenched back by you. That's why we're early.
I would never wrench you. It was just not my style. The last few to come back. There they all are. Lovely. Welcome back. So in our last remaining 20 minutes, the main thing we're going to do is have a bit of conversation now, and any questions and any reflections from that. And then last couple of things from Adrian and Hannah, and then a close. So questions or reflections from your conversations. It's a free-for-all. What's emerged from the tilling of the soil? Feel free to raise your hand either digitally or physically. Yes, Charlie, go for it.
Steve. So I was wondering, what would it be relevant to, on a call like this, do you think, would it be relevant to try and out some smelly fish here? Would that add to the sense of trust and
give us a smelly fish? Absolutely. Come on, Charlie.
So I mean, when Hannah was speaking very much, and I agreed, around diversity, and it just got me thinking around, you know, to what extent have we got diversity? I mean, we probably all think very different things. So we have very rich diversity, but I guess there's also ways in which we're not representing diversity. And
so in what ways do you see us not representing diversity? I'm really intrigued by that. It's a brilliant fish.
Well, it seems a very white call for a start. That was the one that came to mind. And I wondered whether that's relevant, whether that's noteworthy.
My immediate response to that is, if I think about the OD community in particular, the OD community is very monochrome. One of the things I was going to mention at the end of this call, and I'll mention it now because it seems to be relevant, Charlie, is in October, I'm going to be hosting an event with the Tavistock Institute, where I'm also a council member, entitled Wrestling with Differences, How the Theory and Practice of Organisational Development Struggles to Connect Its Rhetoric with Reality. Because OD is a field that talks about difference and embraces difference, but my experience of it is it has a massive blind spot when it comes to particularly ethnicity difference. And one of my friends in the field, you know, she doesn't engage with the OD community precisely because she finds it profoundly white, and she's sick and tired of being invited to talk to consultancies primarily because you know, they want some diversity rather than because she's a practitioner. I'll put Liz, the date, for those who are interested, the date is 13th of October, time TBC'd. Liz has just asked, 13th of October. I think they're proposing to charge a nominal fee. It'll be a half-day session, probably about 50 quid. And it's not just me, so you won't be bored rigid just by my voice. It's with Corinne Archer, who's one of the consultants at the Tavistock Institute of Human Relations. Thank you. That's a great fish. Thanks, Charlie. Any more fish or other creatures? Or responses to what Charlie said?
I can chip in only because we had a really great conversation in our group. No, we kind of just ignored your questions, Steve, and just riffed a bit.
That's fine.
But it was in the same ballpark. But yeah, I suppose there was something for us about being the external and the internal, and how the internal can have access to people and conversations in a way that not necessarily external can, but the importance of how those two work together seems really key. I think there was something about how do we understand change, and sometimes this term change can be seen as a thing rather than change is happening all the time. Maybe where is it getting stuck, and let's get curious about that. So I think there was something about what's our kind of underpinning assumptions about change when we talk about change capability. And then there was quite some interesting stuff about contracting with the commissioner and how we can get caught. I think relating to what Adrian was saying about kind of getting caught in the middle, where the commissioner gets all kind of excited about it and then they kind of drift off, and then you as a change person, whether internal or external, get caught in the middle in that kind of translation between the group it's been delegated to, who don't necessarily have the power and the permission. So there was just some interesting things about roles, contracting, and that maybe just scaling down and prototyping and having a more network view of change, where you're just kind of encouraging those learning loops, but also those conversations and the way it kind of ripples out in a more network view of change. And maybe that's more about how change happens rather than the more kind of traditional views. So I don't think my group want to add anything, but that was just a few little snippets.
What that's got me thinking is one of our group members here is Lentia, and me and Lentia were on a call for a couple of hours nearly earlier on today with another tribe of people who are working on something called requisite agility. And if you dig into requisite agility, this is the book there, if anybody is interested. And actually, Dave lives near me. We're having dinner in a Greek restaurant tonight in Brighton. It's quite interesting to couple the conversation about change capability with the construct or notion of requisite agility, which is literally what it says on the tin. Is what is the requisite type of agility that we need in a particular context. And I think that's another part of it. You know, part of the wrestle here is organizations construct or build a change capability, but then don't think about how requisite it is and how the context might require a different kind of requisite agility.
You say more, Steve, when you use the term requisite?
It's another way of kind of, it's driving at the kind of, it's requisite, appropriate to context and need. Is that about right, Lentia? Is that how you'd describe it? Yeah.
Yes, sorry, I had trouble unmuting, but yes. But we had a big debate on the term requisites. Yeah, I think the analysis or the conclusion is that it's not a one size fits all, and I think a lot of organizations or a lot of people think, okay, agile and speed and change, and it needs to happen all fast, but there are different models that are applicable, but they're all based on the different context. Is it a division? Is it an organization? Is it a big change? Is it a small change? And so on and so forth. And I think maybe the essence is, okay, how can we broaden the mindset with a lot of people that there are different methodologies applicable at that very moment, but people need to understand them. And of course, if you talk to C-level people, board level people, they need to understand the different spectrums, but they will not be the ones doing it. So how can they kind of support the doers when it's applicable at that moment in the organization for that division or maybe broader systematic change that is there?
Yeah. Nicole, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, I suppose where this conversation is sort of taking me, it's to those statements I read with these from to, so from to statements, or demonizing certain things like silos are bad, solo working's bad, command and control is bad. Contextually, I'd want to be booted up the arse to get out the building if that, yeah, so that would, you know, so if the house is on fire, please, I don't want anybody fannying around kind of asking how I'm feeling about it. I just need to be out, really. And also, I think that there's something about the language and the framing. So we talk about shifts. You know, I'm increasingly more thinking about kind of this, what's the stretch? So how do you stretch your sense of what might be possible to that point about requisite? So what do your circumstances, your context kind of require of you? So rather than boot in the likes of the command and control types of leading, or as I said, silos, they're there and they have a relevance in a particular context. How do you stretch people's confidence to kind of look elsewhere for other things? So I guess it's pinching a bit of your brand and kind of label on the edge and stretch. Steve.
Thanks, Nicole. Money's in the post. Any other last reflections before we slowly move to wrap up? Or dead or smelly fish? It's interesting. The bringing of the smelly fish has just reminded me. I'm about to start working with an organisation where there's a real need for a group of people to have their capabilities in all the skills you as a group put up in the last Mentimeter are absolutely congruent with what the client wants these people to be able to do. But the huge smelly fish is simultaneously a kind of almost a concern about the environment which they're going to be working in and how the leadership team are in relation to them. I wonder whether we need a whole new field of practice based on smelly fish, essentially, I think is where I'm going to. So I'm going to, last couple of things. I asked Adrian and Hannah, instead of coming up with closing thoughts, I asked them, I said, could you come up with 3 questions that you think would be useful for people to chew on if they were thinking about building change capability? So Hannah's first up. These are your 3, Hannah, if you want to just frame them in any way you so desire.
Yeah, of course. So first question about what skills you've already got in house and what you need to grow, and creative ways to think of this. We all know that in many organisations, money is tight, and in some organisations, there's no money at all to think about development. So I would encourage you all to look at creative ways of developing your people. It might be through communities of practice, you know, so self-sustaining meetings that give them a chance to learn, a safe space to talk. You could identify practice leads, so where you know you've got skills gaps, advertise opportunities for individuals in your teams to lead the development of that function over the next year. They get to put that on their CV and say they were the lead for that area, and you get someone who's really focused on trying to develop. And also where consultants are brought in, if you are in a kind of an internal change capacity space, don't see that as an us and them, see it as an opportunity to learn something new from people that have got loads of experience. The second question around behaviours. So what behaviours do you look for in superb change practitioners? We've touched on that already, so I won't go into a lot of detail, but what I said before, I really mean. I think it's time for us to start to shift our emphasis in recruitment and in like choosing the people that are tender for commissions to their behaviours, away from some of the skills and expertise that you can teach them once they've landed. And then lastly, I think it's worth spending some time thinking about how much of your time you spend on change to take advantage of opportunities rather than managing threats. This came up in my breakout room, but far too often I think we get caught building change capability to address problem areas, when actually there's loads of tools that we can use to start to identify some real opportunities and do some horizon scanning. So those have been my 3 questions.
Thanks, Hannah. And Adrian?
Yep, and these are all questions I'm grappling with, so I don't have answers, so I'll be interested answers on a postcard for some of these, but if you take that kind of top one, so yeah, what is the change capability that actually is in the mind's eye of our organisations of leaders? You know, what is it that they're actually looking then to you, to us, to provide, and how is that being expressed? You know, what's the language that's being used around that, and does it feel like it's more towards the tools and templates end of it? Is it more towards kind of skill sets? Is it more in mindset? And then how we might choose to respond to that in terms of the language that we use as well. The second one then is, yeah, and what's the impact we're looking for? What would be the measure or evidence that actually we are being effective, being successful, and particularly more on the, what's the qualitative side of that? How does it have a positive impact? And actually, that's a question that sometimes I do use with some of our leaders around, what is it you're actually looking for in this? Can you describe it in terms of what would be the positive impact, the benefit? What would it look like if we do this well? And then the third one, which I think is a really interesting one as well, is just, what is the kind of the currency of change in the organisation? What's really valued, not just the expressed values, but actually what's really valued here. Or another way of putting that could be, what's actually kind of the driving motivators behind a lot of the expectations around change and change capability, with some examples there around, is this being expressed in the currency of speed, time, or quality? Is it cost, benefit, opportunity? Is it more people, process related? And because I think, to link back to SilverBullets, Steve, because there isn't a silver bullet, because these things will be different dependent on context. And even the conversation we've had today is dependent on context that we've had it in a way that if you're going to try to describe to someone who's not been on the call today how Wile E. Coyote and smelly fish have anything doing in the same sentence together, it's not really have much meaning in a way that it will have for this group in its context.
Lovely. I'm not going to offer you questions. I want to offer you three wonderings as my kind of closing thoughts. So my first one is, wondering around how might organisations be more comfortable wrestling with the tension between this idea of wanting to know what good looks like and actually connecting to what you as a group, what we as a group are clearly able to articulate as the practice implications. And I don't think that tension is really openly discussed. It's embodied by that statement from the guy interviewed in an organisation that these people need to operate at several grades above their pay level, quote unquote. Now, how on earth do you wrestle with that tension? The second thing is this thing about when we think about practice, I discovered recently through interviewing Jesse Seegers, who's one of the new board members of ODNE, that in Holland they don't really talk about organisational development. They don't have the same kind of conversations there. There's a community that talks about the craft of change. And I really like that, because the way they see OD is only one part of how change in organizations is viewed. And the beautiful thing about this idea of craft of change is crafting is inherently messy. It involves mistakes, it involves creativity, it involves, again, the mess. And it also, to my mind, kind of cuts against some of the happy clappiness that I sometimes experience around OD and change work. Crafting can be messy, and it is also not standardized. It's more artisan maybe than we think. And the last one is with a nod to Samuel Beckett. There's an inherent absurdity to much of how we sometimes, I think, wrestle with change. I'm not convinced that with the way organizations develop change capability, they pay enough attention to some of the contradictions and absurdities that they create. So the absurdity of creating a center of excellence and a program office, when actually what you're trying to do is attend to something that is inherently emergent, fluid, and changing all the time. That to me is the definition of absurdity. How do you square that? How do you wrestle with that? So I suppose that's a kind of a closing existential thought. What comes next, you'll all get linked to the recording of this to do with what you will. There's a newsletter. If you're interested, I'll happily send you the link for the book project. And as I said, hopefully published, well, it will be back end of this year. Small commercial plug. there's 2 people of the group who have actually been on one of the first 2 cohorts. I developed a program precisely because of what I observed of internal and practitioners particularly their experience of wrestling with being the centre of change, the way in which they become the nodes through which all the crazy flows. So if you or anyone you know wants to be part of the next cohort, there's a couple of places left that start in July, and because you're all lovely people, I'll happily offer a nice discount. So drop me a line if you're interested. And lastly is the thing at the Tavistock in the autumn. So that will be hopefully being promoted soon. It's just being finalised. And that is it. 2 minutes to go. Thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed or found that useful.
Steve, the meta meter, what are the results?
Oh, didn't you see them? You should have seen those. Hold on. I will show you those. Where are we? There we go. You see those?
Not yet.
Why is it not? Hold on.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt the ending. Maybe I
No. You know me, Liz. I'm quite happy to have a bit of mess. Has it thrown it up now?
No, it always gives a black screen and says start screen sharing, but it doesn't.
Okay, right. Wait a minute.
We saw them earlier, Steve. As you were talking through, things were appearing on the screen, but now it won't show at all.
There we go.
Yeah, got it.
Great.
You see, that's change in action. You see, if we were at the planned end of change and everything was going to be a centre of excellence, the centre of excellence for Mentimeter wouldn't have been able to deal with that, because we're operating at the practice end of Mentimeter usage. We're fine with it. So that's fine, Liz. There you go.
Great.
So thank you for playing, and I hope to see you again.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Thanks, Steve.
There will be 1 or 2 more webinars in the series coming later this year as well. So keep your eyes peeled for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, all.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
See
Steve.
you soon, Lee. See you for a chat soon. Take care.
Take care.
Thanks, Hannah.
Thanks, Steve. Bye.
Take care.